Thank you. Okay, last talk of the conference. I know it's been a rough few days. Um, I have a lot of stuff to cover. It's not going to be too technical because you've done a lot of technical things already, and I don't want to overwhelm you at the end of the talk. Um, I speak English. Sorry, I don't speak any Ukrainian or Russian. I also speak English fast because life is unfair, and you have to deal with it. I want to talk about a topic that is important, but also not important, and more like how we feel, how important we are to the market that we're in, and what we're doing to each other that we think is important to tell each other, but really isn't. With that introduction and that confusion, I think you should know that there's more coming. So if you want to have those slides later and the resources that I'm talking about, it's on this QR code and aka.ms.jsfest. So if you want to download those later on, you don't have to ask me about these kind of things. I'm a principal software development engineer at Microsoft. I guess I got the title because the more names you have in it, the more money you get. Or I don't know why I have this long job title. It's really bizarre. I work on the Microsoft Edge browser and the developer experience, like the developer tools, Visual Studio Code, anything that has to do that Microsoft does for developers out there. Before that I was at Mozilla, before that I was at Yahoo, and I've been 20 years a web developer and in W3C doing standards and all these kind of things. So I've seen a lot of terrible things and a lot of weird things come and go. I've written 3 books, contributed to about 10 books, and blogged all the time, so you find me easily. I want to talk about this thing, which cracks me up to no end. Because this is what breaks the whole JavaScript versus CSS world all the time. When you see this important the first time as somebody who just started with development, it means something else to everybody out there. For a CSS developer, it's so important it should override all other inherited settings. Even inline styles can be overwritten with important. For a CSS developer finding this in production, that probably means that someone was here that shouldn't have been. That basically doesn't understand CSS and just put an important in there to make sure that actually it renders the thing that they want to have. Or put like 12 classes on the thing, or named it with like 2 IDs, which makes no sense at all, but people try it. So it's all the things that you have. Incidentally, Internet Explorer 8, I think, had a bug. If you use 64 classes on the element, you can override an important. But you also should not be ever touching code again. For a JavaScript developer writing CSS, it actually means this is how I get it to do what I want, because I don't understand or don't want to get into that whole CSS mess thing. And for a JavaScript developer not knowing CSS, it means not important. And that's what I love about this, because it really messes with people's heads. So when we talk about best practices like not using an important or only using it as the last means of defense, we always need insight and context. It's terrible of a CSS developer to tell a JavaScript developer off for using it. And for a JavaScript developer to say something with an exclamation mark in front should not be important. It should be not important. What the hell are you guys doing? So when we talk about how we should code, how we write good code, professional code, it's always a contextual thing. And it's not HTML versus JavaScript versus CSS. All these things together make up a good web product. That's why we have them. That's why all of them evolved differently. That's why all of them changed differently. Each to their own are probably not enough to create a great product. You can use only HTML and CSS. You can only use JavaScript. But to make a really good product, you should use all of these 3 to their best abilities, to what they were meant to do. So what was enough in the beginning of the web is probably not enough nowadays anymore. So when people get like all whiny about like, oh my god, people use React and they're killing the internet, and the internet in 2002 was so much better because it was all HTML and CSS. No, it was shit. It was not fun. And it's okay to use something new and something better right now because we expect more of the web than we expected back then. And just because we can do everything with JavaScript, it may not be the most effective and performant way of doing it. And often we're asked to do everything with JavaScript and frameworks because the company doesn't want to hire enough developers to maintain the thing. And one person should do everything, which means if that person leaves the company, all knowledge goes away with that person. If that person gets run over by a bus, the product is stuck. And you should never have that kind of architecture in your product. Always think of the bus. An interesting thing is like we all crave importance and recognition. Like we would love our companies to care more about what we do. but we don't want to explain it to people because we're busy coding. And at the same time, we're trying to go online and talk to people about what we do and that we're actually a good professional developer. And this is where we waste so much time shouting at each other on Twitter or in threads on GitHub or in communication channels, any mailing lists, these kind of things. And we give a bad impression to the outside world. We give a bad impression to the outside world of being a hostile, terrible place to work in because we just point each other's errors out all the time. And as somebody who just starts developing, that's a horrible thing to think about. Like, I don't want to put my code out there. So being visible is much easier these days than it used to be. Like, I remember like we had mailing lists, we had a few forums, we had these kind of things. Nowadays we have Twitter, we have GitHub, we have social networks, we have Slack, we have like live editing in tools, we have live editing in Visual Studio Code, we've got CodePen, we've got these communities around development. So being visible to others is much, much easier than it used to be. And a lot more of code is available in public as well, and that's great because that means that code can survive and can go ahead even if you're not interested anymore or your company's not interested anymore. We could collaborate that way and build great things together. But what we actually do most of the time is actually criticizing the work of others, because that's easier to do. That's much nicer, because we feel better when we see somebody else made a mistake publicly and we were the one that pointed it out. And it's fascinating how many things we do that are not that important, but we point to each other out as like, that's the error. If you drop any code publicly, you get a lot of assumptions and well-intentioned advice back. This was the other day when I was just making a little hacky demo-y thing, and I just was amazed how that with map and reduce and these kind of things, we can do a lot of like avoiding of loops that we used to have to do. So I wrote this little thing to create a drop-down menu from an object, and basically did the sort joining and used the set to make sure that the objects are all that the object's values are only the ones that are once in there, not several times. And of course, you put this online, and the first thing that somebody will do is like, but. And the first but was, which totally makes sense, it's not safe to assume clean data. So that person told me off like, okay, if one of the object element is empty, then you will have an empty option in the drop-down as well. So I'm using another set to do this kind of thing. Great feedback, wonderful. But assumes that actually my object is something that I don't control. That this object could have an empty element in it ever. It was like 15 elements in there. There's no point in that kind of thing. My code, this little function, was never meant to scale. But it was already, oh, it's not good enough code because it doesn't scale. The next person, of course, it's not safe to assume performance with lots of data. James, a really good friend of mine, he basically said, like, avoid writing loops, because actually what you've done there is like 5 loops that the JavaScript engine does for you, and it probably will be slow if I put 2 terabyte of JavaScript object in there. Which is, again, very good feedback, very sensible, but didn't consider the context again, because I didn't want to put this as an NPM module out on the web. I just wanted this to be for this little website, for this little demo, quickly to throw away. But happy accidents can happen too. So one person was asking like, but how do you filter? Because I don't see any filtering going on here. And then somebody else pointed out that's a set, that's a new thing that we have in JavaScript right now, and the other person was +1ing it, and the other person was thanking the other person. This is the kind of interaction of developers that I want to see online, especially pointing to MDN and not pointing to Stack Overflow or to W3 schools. Point to the places that get maintained. But instead, we actually get so excited about pointing each other things out that are always there. Like assuming that your code should do something else than it does and telling you off that you're doing wrong. One of them is like, this does not work when the data you put it in is impure. We always write defensive code because for years and years we had to work with terrible data and unpredictable data and data that came from third sources. So we want everything to be like paranoid about what's coming in and cleaning our code up, and that makes our code slower and also sometimes not maintainable. This doesn't perform when you have a lot of data. I might not have a lot of data. Not everything needs to scale to huge sizes. Actually, I worked on Yahoo front page, millions of end users. I just rolled out a 70,000 computers from one server to another, from one browser to another for 24 million end users. That's the kind of data I used to work with. But most of the stuff that I do, doesn't scale to that and doesn't need to scale to that. So we shouldn't be like, oh, this is the only way to code this. If people have fun doing it in a simpler way, let them have fun. They will have to scale when they go on bigger projects, but then they also have to work together with other developers, and that's when the communication should begin. This could be written much shorter, is my favorite, when people like the whole, like, yeah, that's one map reduce, and there's like this kind of like extra shortening, and we always get this fetish of making things shorter. I used to write in Perl. I can write 2 lines of completely unintelligible code that does 10,000 things. I also realized that I never ever want to do this because I don't want to be the person maintaining it. I don't want to be the clever person. Most people that write clever code have just not found good code yet. This does not work in old browsers, is always a thing, like when people are like, oh my god, you're not thinking about Internet Explorer 8. And I'm like, yeah, don't think about Internet Explorer 8. I'm thinking about it and it's making me unhappy, and you shouldn't be unhappy either. So of course it doesn't work in old browsers, but sometimes, most of the time, it does not have to. You control the environment more often nowadays than you used to in the past. Of course there's people out there with old browsers, but they shouldn't get beautiful interfaces because it just confuses them. Give them the drop-down menus and that loads every page every single time you click on something, they're happy with that. This is not accessible is something that is very dangerous to say, because accessibility is a super important thing and it's not a simple thing. And what does accessible mean? Like, this is accessible for a blind user using a screen reader. Okay, that's most of what we think to make things accessible. But then you have somebody who's dyslexic. You have somebody who's colorblind. You have somebody who cannot actually move a mouse. You have somebody who actually is on a bad connection. That's part of an accessibility thing as well. So accessibility is a scale. It's not like a one-off thing. So saying this is not accessible means nothing. I just, doesn't work right now because of connection, but I turned the subtitles on this PowerPoint. PowerPoint has this built in. Probably nobody knew about that. I just found it out by accident. And I find it quite cool that it doesn't do the full job with it, so it makes it a bit more accessible. But it's not a perfect solution, but it's a good solution to add some extra to it. So if you want to do these kind of things to answer somebody who points out these things with this kind of like derpy answering, I wrote Derpify. That's on GitHub as well, where you can just enter something and it does it with that kind of like random upper and lower casing kind of thing as well, which is a great answer if somebody annoys you on Twitter and is like pointing out to them like this is not really a good question there. Of course, this was a JavaScript function as well, which I put in a tweet, and then I make it actually more readable, and then of course somebody came up and said like, yeah, I can make it shorter because now it's really unreadable. And I'm like, yeah, okay, this is cool. This is fun. Like throwing these things back and forth and learning that way is good. But we also have to remember that people always look. Like, I don't like Stack Overflow, not because it's not a good resource, but because it's a resource that upvotes the solutions that explain the how rather than the why. Like, I call this the full Stack Overflow developer that basically copied and pasted random things from Stack Overflow into their code and hopes it works until it changes some numbers around and these kind of things. We have this like quick solutions that tell us like, this is working, don't think about what it does, and we should not be in that space any longer. It's kind of a comfortable rebellion. You know, we like to show off publicly, telling other people off that we're clever and we write cool code and we write clean code. And most of the time when we look at the stuff that we send out into our code bases or the stuff that we write, we're not clean and clever either. But it's easier to point out to other people that they're doing it wrong and you feel better because you're doing it. So all of these things are quick wins if you want to feel good about yourself. You basically, if you zoom out far enough, you can make accusations that can't be argued against, like this is not accessible. They're like, well, I cannot say if it's accessible the same way you cannot say it's not accessible, because accessibility is the scale thing. But it means you can look clever and caring for the web. You tell people off for having code that doesn't perform. You tell people off for having code that doesn't work with lots of data. It does, however, also mean that we discourage people, because it's not fun to get an answer like that when you're just excited about finding out what a set is about. And people are like, yeah, but you're using it wrong. Oh, God, really? Okay, then I don't use it then, fine. And is it really the right place to argue for quality? Is it really, when the product is done? It's so easy to point out that something is wrong when it's finished. But the story, how we got from our code to a final product, there's so many things in between that we don't even have control that ends up in messy code. It's unfair to the developer to tell them off that the thing doesn't work. Same way when I work for Microsoft and people ask me about Word, and I'm like, no idea. I mean, I jumped from Windows XP to Windows 10 because in between I only used Macs and Linux machines, and now I don't know most of the answers that people have. Quality-focused developers, we rightfully care about these things, and we should care about all these things that are coming up here. Accessibility should be one of our most important things, because our end users are diverse and have problems. We all have problems. I got glasses. Without them, I couldn't see. I get older as well. My body changes, your body changes. We all have a different situation where we have to care about accessibility, and we have to benefit from accessible things. Subtitles on things are great because I can watch it in the gym, for example, without having to listen to it. I learned English from watching TV programs with English subtitles. It was Monty Python. It was the only one that came with subtitles. It explains a lot. But it's a wonderful thing to learn a language by having something that was made for people who are hard of hearing. Interoperability is also a super important thing. No, we don't all have MacBooks on a fast connection. We don't all have Android machines. We don't all have one browser. People can use whatever the hell they want to go on the web, and we have no right to tell them that they have to use a certain environment. Performance, of course. If people wait 7 seconds for your website to do something, that's not a clever thing to do. And security. People are stupid. Single people, one person is intelligent. As a group, we're idiots. We're scared of each other. We actually do these kind of things. Every time there's a leak of a database of passwords, I weep, because password 123, baseball, let me in, and these kind of passwords still exist. And you're just like, really? Like, the other day I was in a hotel that had NFC cards to open the door, much like the hotel here as well. And Sebastian showed this reader earlier that you can read and write these cards. So I had one of those as well, so I read out the room key. It was an integer number on the thing writable. So I just rewrote it to another room, opened the other door. Security is not a thing that people care about. We have to care about that for people. And that sounds arrogant, but it's just, we don't want to be the person that actually is responsible for millions of data leaking of our end users. And the state of the web right now is actually not good. It's actually terrible. WebAIM, the website the other day, had 1 million websites, one of the biggest websites according to Alexa and others. Alexa? Yeah. And they looked at it, what kind of accessibility problems they have, and they're rampant, like not enough contrast, empty links, empty buttons, all of these things are out there. And they also found out the more people used frameworks, the worse the accessibility became, because they expected the framework to do it for them, rather than actually having to put some extra work in. In terms of performance, the web is also terrible. This is the page weight percentile. So basically 90% of the websites out there are 5.8 meg and more. I mean, you probably saw the talk by Harry earlier, and I had the same thing. I arrived here with my German SIM card, and it told me like 10 kilobyte costs me 12 cents. I've never seen actually a message that does mobile transfer in kilobytes. I didn't think that existed since 1995 or something, but it's still there. So the average website would cost more than a cinema ticket to look at, and that makes no sense to me. And how is it possible with all the insights we get? Developer tools are ridiculously good. They're absolutely amazing what we can see in those things. We get like performance tests, we find out when there is refreshes going on, we find out which element is actually slow, which animation could be optimized. But I think the problem is we don't have time. We don't have time to even look at all these developer tools. When I look at the statistics of the developer tools internally, people use the HTML view, they use the console, and they use maybe the CSS view and then the network tab to download illegal videos. That's what people basically do. Like when you see the whole great talks at these events, when people are like, oh, look what I can do with DevTools, most people don't use it yet, and that's kind of sad. We have audits in browser tools, like Lighthouse audits in Chromium, or in Chrome in this case, that actually give us a report of what is going on. How good is the accessibility? How good is the performance? How good is the SEO practices? The SEO is that's the only one people care about. Because like, oh yeah, it's got to be found by Google, and then it's successful. And then if the people wait 15 seconds for it, it's their problem. They should buy a better mobile or something. These are in there now. They're not even extra tools anymore. We've got great tools like Accessibility Insights, which we just open sourced. And that one gives you a fast pass to run over a website and find out the issues of the website. It also gives you an assessment, a walkthrough of the website that you're using at the moment. And it also has some extra tools for you. It can give you a full report if you need to have like a government website that needs an auditing report to be printed out and sent to people. I don't know what they're for, but people love these kind of things. Or it has a quick insight view of what's going wrong in your website. I mean, we have a bit of time, so let me just try that. This is a website that you might have seen. So if you turn on the Accessibility Insights here with an extension for Chrome, oh, this is actually my desktop. This is not the website that you've seen. So I need to drag that one over. Over, yay. You know you can shout at me when I do stupid things? Come on, you can do it. Yay. Okay, where's my mouse? There's my mouse. That is excellent. What the hell? So, okay, we don't need that one. Then we can drag things. That's excellent. Look at that. So, JSFest. I have the extension here, and that one gives me several things. I can, or when I click on it, it gives me several things. Come on. So, I can have an automated check. I can just have the landmarks. I can do a color thing that does a grayscale on it, and I can do the tab stops. And if you do the quick one, it just basically reloads the page and does an accessibility analysis for you and highlights all the things that have problems. And it tells you then what the problem is, where to find it in your HTML. You can copy the problem if you want to put it in an email and complain to the person that is responsible for that. Or if you set up your GitHub repository, you can actually file a GitHub report directly about this issue. And that's pretty neat. That's pretty nice to do. One of my favorite things to do with this one is also doing the tab stops. And that was what when I checked out the site earlier. I'm not bashing this site. It's a nice site. It makes, but there's things that we do that we don't quite understand what kind of impact we have. So when you do the tab stops, it actually shows you where the tabs are going. So I'm going here from one to the next one. And now I say, for example, I want to go to the schedule. I hit enter, I go to the schedule, and it shows me the schedule. But it shows me the schedule. If it's a blind user or as a keyboard user, I actually want to access the schedule, I actually have to tap 97 times more to actually reach the schedule. Because it goes through the whole page. It didn't shift the focus of the element to the element, it just scrolled it into the page. So this is not a nice experience to do for developers, for users. So now I'm actually at the schedule. This is only hit 96 times, then you can read what you come for. But these are simple things to find out. But it needs a tool like that to make people understand where they're going wrong with it. And I'm actually happy that we have this in there right now, and it's fun for you to use. And I just want to make sure that we have an idea of what's going on there. Okay. WebHint is another project that is done by the Open Source Foundation, the Open Foundation it's called now, used to be the JavaScript Foundation. That one is a tool that actually gives you insights into accessibility, the compatibility, the PWA readiness, the performance, pitfalls of like HTML mistakes that people all do, and a security assessment of your website. It's also an NPM module, so you can use that as part of your continuous integration to run your website with. But you know what? All of that is not important to people. We had these tools for a long time, and as I said, if I look at the statistics, how many of them are used? Mostly by people on stage and mostly by people that write blog posts about them, not end users or developers that actually use these things, because we're too busy doing work. We don't have time to look at these tools and to understand them. And we also have this barrier in our head that we learn once and repeat forever. Sebastian here, who was like, I think he was the founder of Webpack, or no, something like that. Babel, yeah. Babel, and he's like, yeah, I mean, the past 10 years, my debugging was console log hello and console log hello after the thing as well. We have breakpoints in developer tools. We have breakpoints in Visual Studio that I can actually put a breakpoint in my code and the browser just does things in the background and I don't even have to jump from browser to back. But we learned about this for a long, long time and we don't want to change our ways because it just works. I think the main thing why it doesn't matter how much tooling we have and how well we do is that the assumption that we're in control. That with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we build websites. True, we build websites with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but when it comes to a product that gets rolled out to end users, we are a tiny part of the whole thing. Because the content management system comes in, the server infrastructure, the DevOps, the IT department has something to say about it, the legal department has something to say about it, salespeople basically sold things to clients that want to see things that are in there that we don't need, shareholders and the investors in your company as well. All of these people have a say in the final product. So pointing out to a developer that something is wrong on the website, like I showed earlier with the tab thing, is not fair. Because probably somebody in between undid a lot of good that we did as developers. Because somebody thought there was a tracking thing going on there. If you saw Harry's talk, it's like most of the slowness is actually third-party stuff and not our own code. So as developers, when somebody, as a developer, we want to build something that is code quality and is accessible and is secure, we're competing in 3 things that we don't even know about. That is staying in budget, time and money. How many times have you heard, we know it's shit, but just roll it out and next week we give you enough time to fix it? And you never get the time to fix it, it's a lie. First to market and continuous growth. These are the 3 things that are killing the quality of anything that we release as developers right now. And we're not in control of those. The budget means there's reckless reuse. Like when we can use something that is already there, instead of our developers building something bespoke and sensible to our environment, people are gonna use it. I saw that the other day and it cracks me up that like you do a create React app, my React app, and then you do a clock on it, and it's 1.5 million lines of code contributed by somebody without any quality control, you don't know what's in there. And he says that's normal for web development. And you know, it is. And it makes sense. We always get very excited about don't repeat yourself, don't reuse things. But this is kind of overdoing it, where we're just using the thing that we might need in the future, but we don't need yet. But it's rampant. Like this research again by HTTP Archive shows that 27% of the websites in the HTTP Archive, which are millions of websites, are 90 to 99% third-party content. Bootstrap, React, Angular, MooTools, YUI, whatever people found and never wanted to reuse again, but for the moment it did the right job and we put it in there and we leave it there. And we always think, of course, if Facebook uses it, it's probably going to be good, right? If Twitter is used by, Bootstrap was made by Twitter, if it scales to Twitter's size, it's going to be good for us as well. Just because something is engineered for a certain use case nicely doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the right solution for your thing. And just because it scales for Facebook with their infrastructure of millions and millions of servers doesn't mean that their framework is probably behaving well on your infrastructure. The bigger thing I find annoying is the first to market thing. Get it out. Be the first one to do it. I was here 3 weeks ago at another conference. I talked about accessibility at speakers dinner to people. I got really excited about it. And they're like, yeah, people pay us to be the first one in the market. And then they don't care anymore. We're the first one to have that super carousel with like 3D grass and things in the background because that gives us more users or whatever. So first to market basically is not good for quality because it's there to get the thing out and make sure that users can actually look at it. And it doesn't matter what the quality is. So when it comes to accessibility, interoperability, and performance, people don't care much about them when it comes to the first-to-market projects. And what we call those things are the MVPs. MVP is the minimum viable product, or what I also call it, its most validation is pending. We just basically get the thing out there and we put it together with like some bits of string, chewing gum, spit, and sticky tape, and that's our most valuable product because it's already there. People can use it. Look, we've got users. It's amazing. And to a degree, this is understandable. If you haven't seen this one yet, it's a talk by John Cooney. It's called the Flash Games Postmortem. He was a Flash game developer. He also ran Newgrounds.com and these kind of things. And he said like, in the Flash community, in the indie game community that came from the Flash community, we had no care in the world what the quality of our code was. We wanted to get a quick game out, put some ads on it, make some money, and we know in 2 weeks nobody's going to play that game anymore, nobody's going to care about it. We just throw the thing out and we make a bit of money with it and then we just let it burn. We don't care. Which is okay and understandable. If you're like a high school kid in America that wants to make some money with a Flash game, you don't want to do the infrastructure and scale it to infinity and make sure that everything is fine. You just want to have your game out there and have fun doing it. And the whole indie game world came from that kind of world. So if your MVP is a series of quick wins, that's not a problem at all. So you do the thing, you throw it away. You do the other thing, you throw it away. You do the other thing, you throw it away. And then you basically go on and on like that. But on the web, we have this continuous growth thing. And we have the budget thing. So our most valuable, minimal valuable product is never going to be deleted. It's just going to get extended, and we put some more third-party code in there and make something in there. So the first thing we do is put some analytics packages on there and increase the stickiness. You know, like make people sign up for a newsletter before they even looked at the website, or ask for notifications, although you got nothing sensible to say to people. But we just like, let's force users into our product. And of course, we just don't want to actually build these things, but you use third parties for it. This is another interesting blog post about the third-party web that shows what is slowing down the web. And it's mostly like analytics stuff, and it's ads, and it's developer utilities, and it's A/B testing platforms, these kind of things. Of course, we want to keep the budget in check, so that's why we put the MVP and we never delete it. So what we do is we put the MVP out, the way it is right now, end users are, I don't care, fine. And then we put the analytics on it for the first version, because then we see if it's a success or not, which is because most of the time something new will be a success the first few days. If in the longevity it will have something more, that's the question. Then we put some marketing features on it, like, oh, a newsletter is probably a good idea, notifications are a great idea, everybody loves pop-up windows. You know, like tell people about the product, because obviously they're too stupid to use it. And then we have a beefier cloud, the next one, because when it gets too slow because of all the third-party code we put in, then we put it on Amazon or Azure or Google Cloud or whatever other cloud thing you use. We use some CDN up front that caches the things for us, and we basically throw more technology at it to make sure that the thing works. And then we have an enterprise customer out of a sudden. And we have an international rollout, and then our MVP falls apart because out of a sudden we have to think about internationalization, and we have to think about accessibility as not a nice-to-have feature, but our enterprise customer will not be able to use the thing if it's not accessible to a degree. And then of course we're freaking out and we're panic. What happens then after we made this horrible product that should have died in a fire and basically be replaced by something sensible, and we put lots of technology in it? This is the moment when magic happens, when accessibility, interoperability, and performance and security becomes interesting by hiring a consultant to do the thing. That's where Harry and people like that make their money, because people already messed up and their own developers are overwhelmed maintaining the thing, and they don't have time to clean it up because they have to maintain it. It's terrible. Because when something costs money, then it becomes important. I love being a consultant. You basically get paid for telling people the things they already know, but they actually don't want to say to each other because they don't want to blame each other. The amount of times I just pointed out the most obvious things that are broken in products, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You're like, what? Like, your engineers know that. Yeah, but we don't talk to our engineers. You're an expert. We paid you for that. That's great that you hear about this. So if you got consultants in your company, make them your buddies, because they can make stuff work for you. Problem is, once you're in that space, it's really not easy anymore to fix a product that way, because you had this MVP with a third-party code and the things that you don't maintain. So fixing a non-performing, inaccessible, insecure product at this stage is a lot of work. Again, that your company doesn't want to pay for and people didn't budget for. There's ways to do it. It involves changes in the process, and people hate change. They're like, we hired intelligent engineers. How come we're not accessible? Well, you didn't give them time to actually think about what they're doing. You just got to get the thing out of the market and make it exciting for people. There's always a lot of blame going around, which doesn't help either. So it's like companies are like, oh, that was that department doing it, that department doing it, that department. It does not matter who did it. Let's fix the thing. Often we pile on more products and processes, adding to the craft. So that's when this third party says it makes the site performant by going through their proxy and filtering things out that are not there anymore. And it's why do we have the amount of code already online? Why don't we just delete the MVP thing and build something proper? Let the thing run. That's what we do with Windows. We have Windows is always a thing that is out there, and then we do a fork. And in the fork, we do all the new features, and the other one just gets security updates and gets basically maintainability. Different departments maintain that. So we don't change the one, and then we shift it around. So it makes no sense to actually keep adding to a product that is only a single monolithic infrastructure. So what are patches and solutions we see these days for these kind of things, for the slow-performing websites, for the horrible, inaccessible websites when it comes to connectivity and speed? AMP is one. Oh, the people of the web that love HTML and CSS hate AMP. Because it's like, oh my God, it's Google taking over the web and putting everything on their CDN. We should be embarrassed that AMP exists. We should feel bad that publishers, like content publishers, want something else than HTML and CSS because it did not give them what they wanted. And AMP gives it to them. It is a fast way to read something on a mobile device. It gives you in a carousel. Google supports your content for you and promotes your content for you. It's very understandable that people like AMP. And then I see all the articles like, oh, if I optimize my website properly, then I'm actually better than an AMP website. And you're like, yeah, but you never get the time to optimize your website properly because you're actually fixing bugs all the time rather than doing that. I'm not saying that AMP is a great solution. I'm just saying it's there. And people use it instead of the web, and that's horrible. That we shouldn't be embarrassed about that. Safari limiting JavaScript now, that only a certain amount of JavaScript gets through, and they're thinking about cutting it off. Or a certain timeout, that if the JavaScript takes like more than 5 seconds to execute, browser actually cuts off JavaScript as well. Same with Chrome's never slow mode, and also all kind of blockers. I always love when people are like, oh, I love the web because I've got an ad blocker. And you're like, great. So when you block ads, ads become more aggressive to not be blocked. The detecting ad blocker messages that I see now on websites fascinate me. You know, like, oh, you got an ad blocker. You probably don't want to block ads. And you're like, yeah, I do. That's why I have an ad blocker. You know, like, so don't tell me off for using that kind of thing. The problem of the web is that it's too forgiving. That is not controlled. And that's also the great thing about it. It grew because anybody can do whatever the hell they want on the web. But that, of course, for performance and quality is a problematic thing. It's ripe for abuse to a degree. The web is defined as forgiving to developer error. That's one of the main design principles of HTML. Like when a developer puts a p tag in there and doesn't close it, the browser should close it for them and make a proper DOM tree out of it. We are actually protecting the end user from developer mistakes in the web. Like servers do that, browsers do that, all the software that brings things to screens. Parsers and browsers need to swallow a lot of terrible code and still make something useful of it. And I mean, I'm working with enterprise people now. I've seen ActiveX controls still in use. I see Flash still in use. I see people that wrote things that in Word and then exported it as HTML and wonder why it doesn't render properly. And we're to blame that we actually allowed this back then, but it's there. Years of competition in browsers and platforms created legacy, non-standard code that we also have to support. When we brought out Spartan, the first version of Edge, we made a brand new browser. HTML parser, really clean, really fast, new JavaScript engine, put it on the web. 90% of the web didn't show up properly because people relied on things that only Chrome did, that only Safari did, that only Firefox did in some cases. The amount of white buttons with white text that we found because somebody used a WebKit gradient background, which is not standard. So we had to support WebKit gradient in our browser as well. Same as Chrome needs to support WebKit gradient, and Safari does it because it's Safari. It means not only craft, but it also security attack vectors. Like all these old things, like when we had an Internet Explorer, we had VML. We have things like inline SVG. All these things become security attack vectors as well because the web has become so complex and has to understand old code. An ActiveX control is basically an invitation to get your server hacked by now. But in Korea, most of the banks do encryption in ActiveX. And you're like, what? I don't want to live in this world anymore. We can't stop developers from being sloppy. We cannot. We cannot tell you off for doing it. We tried with XHTML, where we said like, okay, XML needs a validation before the browser shows it, and then nobody wanted to do it because as soon as you put an ad on your page, there's an unencoded ampersand and the thing wouldn't display at all. It's depressing. It's not fun. So what can we do? How can we control this? What can we as the web developers do in this world? We can complain about it to each other. We can go to events and pat our back and say like, we're not doing that, it's stupid other people that don't go to events that do that. Or we can understand that we're part of this world. We're just one part of this, and we have to find ways to be heard by these other departments, by these other environments. So things we can do is to stop arguing amongst ourselves which technology is better. You should use CSS because it's awesome. You should use TypeScript. You should use Flash or whatever. This is pointless. We're actually wasting our time, and we're seen as like a bickering group of people online that actually have their pet projects instead of just building things together. We should contribute and clean up products that people use without thinking about them. Content management system, build tools, frameworks, all of these things are open source. So if you used React and you did a great accessible control, feed that back to the React project. Even if they say no, you've done something. There's a record of them like, by the way, next time there's a React project that's not accessible, why don't you use that control that that person built? You know, we have the power to change these things. It's not like a magical thing. Chromium is an open source project. Node is open source. Most of the JavaScript engines are available for you to tinker with as well. So there's so many things to keep us busy instead of bickering at each other on Twitter. Take our time to understand why people do things wrong before telling them off what they do. So when you see some code that's like horrible, start a conversation and say like, oh, actually, it doesn't scale to that size. Does it need to? No, I just wanted to use it. That example with the set, explaining to somebody what a set is much, much better for this world than telling me off for like, this doesn't scale to millions of users. Earn our seat at the table where stupid decisions are being made. And this is something that was weird for me, because I was a developer my whole life, and then out of a sudden I got promoted into a chain where it's like, out of a sudden you got the choice to become an architect or you have to go into management. So there's this barrier in our careers as developers that sooner or later we have to stop developing and go somewhere. And a lot of people told me off like, oh Chris, you don't code anymore, what's going on? And I'm like, you know what? I like being in these rooms before to stop stupid decisions from being made. I like being there as a person with technical knowledge to actually, for a change, say, no, we shouldn't be doing this because our developers don't have time to use this. We shouldn't reuse this project because it's broken. Let's start something new. It needs us that learned all the problems as developers to go into the next level of management in our companies or communicate with them as a person as an expert to ask, to make sure that we don't have to build things that we don't want to build. We should optimize our workflows to include required quality control as soon as possible. You know, if we can do this before we actually roll out the code, of course there will be third-party things being put on our website, but our code at least will be not bad. And I love that we have tools that tell me while I'm coding that I'm doing something wrong. Linting and validation in your editing tools is a very, very powerful thing. As I said, WebHint is also a package in Node, so you can actually put that in your control. It's also an extension for Visual Studio Code, so while I'm writing an image without an alternative text, it tells me, by the way, there should be an alternative text in there. Why don't you have one? There's a great article on CSS Tricks about make it hard to screw up driven development, like explaining all the linters that you can use and the tools that tell you off for doing things wrong before you actually publish to the world. And brush up your knowledge of development tools and give feedback to them. You are our customers. Like when you say something like, I've never used this in the developer tools, but I want to have something like that, go on GitHub, file a bug, file a request, file a feature request, because we actually, as browser makers, as developer tool makers, you are our audience. End users don't care. They should not get developer tools ever. They're just confused when they randomly open. But you actually are in control of the developer tools that you get in browsers. There's nothing that says like you're not allowed to actually ask for things. You can also contribute to them as well. Firefox developer tools are open. Chromium developer tools are also open to a degree. And many of the other tools in the node space are actually available for you as well. These are our hammers and wrenches and screwdrivers. We should actually be in control of those things and not wait for the next hammer. The way we work now is becoming less and less important. I give a lot of talks about this as well, and I see it myself, because the way we actually think we're building websites is not that necessary anymore, because most websites are done, as I said, 90 to 99% third-party code and reused like components. And we even have like things like a visual detection of like painting things on a whiteboard and generating a code from it. Deep learning, machine learning is going into the coding space as well. Code written for machines can be written by machines better than a human should do it. So our jobs are not safe either from automation. And I think it's important that we understand that our job should be to be more human and to communicate with other people. Most of the products created now use other people's code, not our code. So let's build accessible, secure, and performance solutions for people to reuse. When you throw something on NPM and publish it on NPM, then make sure it scales to fucking infinity, it has no security problems, it is accessible. When you just put things on your own web product, I don't care. But as soon as as you have some that somebody else will use, that's when the quality becomes very important. And I love that we have tools that empower people. This was the other day, just a few weeks ago. This kid was basically using TensorFlow and Angular to build a face recognition and handwriting recognition app live on stage, and he's 10 years old. We should be scared of that, but I'm not scared of that. I'm happy about that. As a lead developer, I always hire people that are better than me, that are hungrier than me, that are more interested than me to prove themselves to the company. That way I can move into these meetings where people make stupid decisions. And I'm sure that if I go, there's still somebody in the company that can do these kind of things. We are all replaceable, so make sure that your communication skills give you a chance to have a job in the future as well. And that's all I had, so thanks very much.
Дякую за доповідь. Якщо в когось є якісь запитання, просто підніміть руку, я підійду.
I guess he meant if you have questions, you can ask them.
Yeah, this is the part where you answer questions, if you don't mind, of course.
No, fine.
So I've been hearing a lot about this web stuff over the last 6 months, I believe. I just happened to visit some of the front-end meetings. And I hear a lot that you kind of argue between React, Angular, Vue, and all that stuff that's not very compatible between one another. And I believe that web should go in sort of how do you say that in English? To have a lot more standards, so like to have solutions for problems, not 3, not 4, not 7, but actually 1 that people reuse. And do you see that actually happening, or is it still like a dream, some sort of...
It's become much better than it used to be. I mean, I remember when I started, there was Netscape, there was Internet Explorer, there was like all the browsers had their own ways of doing JavaScript and HTML even. Now actually with HTML5 we have a standard that actually everybody supports. With CSS is a standard that we support, so the W3C standards are there to be the standard solution. What frameworks like Angular and Vue and these kind of things do is like the routing, it's doing the packaging, it's doing the whole what makes it an app, not just how it renders in the page. I think there will not be one solution, and that will be terrible as well. I love that a lot of the standards, the new web standards that we have been influenced by things like jQuery, are influenced by things like Vue, React, these kind of things. So when it comes to I/O stuff, like for example, we had XML HTTP request for Ajax, and now we got the Fetch API. And the Fetch API got actually influenced, the standard API, by what certain frameworks were doing, and the best practices that people found through these frameworks. Our big problem with the framework stuff is that it gives you far too much too quick. So it's a fast thing to roll something out, and then how do you maintain it? And people are shocked when Angular 1 was not compatible with Angular 2, and you're like, yeah, it's software, it's written by people. We make mistakes. So one solution to solve them all will never be a case, but it's great that these things can influence the standards. And also, once the browsers that these things run on support some of the features that were inspired by these frameworks, they don't need to be part of the framework anymore. So the framework should do a test if it's supported natively and then not simulate it kind of thing. So this is what we do a lot with Webpack and with other things as well, where it's just like, if the environment natively supports or standard supports what is being done, don't simulate it, only simulate it for the other older environments. But I don't think there's going to be one true way to do things. That's what Flash tried to do, and look where it's now.
Yeah, it didn't work, but the point is, it wasn't exactly the point I'm trying to make, but I had an idea quick, but this is what actually is trying to happen. Like, exactly those XML, HTTP requests, AJAX, APIs, what now we get is fetch, is a single solution that is native. I also hear a lot about web components these days that are also trying to be single solution to everything. So might not we just get what we don't want? We might get the one to solve them all, which will be just the one to break everything and will be unable to do anything.
I think patience is a problem. Like, a lot of times these things take time to actually be implemented in all the browsers across the board. So people say, like, they see it not working in one environment, or they say, like, oh, web components don't work. So we actually have to use React to do component-driven development because React components work everywhere. So often we have a standard that takes like a year or 2 years to be supported everywhere. So instead of using that one, people use a framework that actually makes it much easier for them to reach that immediately. That MVP problem. People want it now, they heard about it, and they don't want to wait until it's supported by the browser. Which is weird, because every browser comes as a developer edition now as well. So you can, as developers, you can actually pre-test for what's coming for the end users in the next 3 months. Which is a great feature to have, but most companies don't even take advantage of that. So I would love everything to be standard compliant, and I love writing my things in standards only and vanilla JavaScript, but a lot of people realize that using a component framework like React, Vue, Angular empowers people much more, not having to know everything about the web to build something. Sometimes it gets too complex as well. Service Worker is a great example. Service Worker was a replacement for the absolutely horrible HTTP, whatever it was called, like the way to actually do offline functionality before that. And then we made Service Worker so complex that most people now use Workbox.js, a library on top of Service Worker, to do the work. So not everybody has time to look at all the standards evolving and give feedback there. So that's why we have quicker solutions for other people. I wish we weren't there, but we were better at that. And I do hope that with like Vue and newer component environments, the people working on them, they know they want to make the web better as well. So they don't want to actually replace the web, they just want to make it better. So I see the dependency on frameworks to going back to not having the framework be much faster than it used to be in the past. Things like jQuery didn't die for 5 years. Things like Angular in a certain version gets replaced within a few weeks now, so that's pretty good.
Okay, I have a lot to say as well, but I believe I'm not the only one talkative here, so I'm just going to pass the mic.
Давайте ще одне запитання. Якщо ні, то давайте просто подякуємо, поаплодуємо.